So it sometimes seems like election season never ever ends in the United States, but at least in the past year, we've had a whole lot of excitement about the 2016 election. The Russians are involved, voters are being sliced and diced in every which way and micro-targeted by campaigns, and it just seems like there's a whole lot going on in this space. A year ago, you would have told me, I guess I was of the mindset that our elections were so decentralized that the integrity of them was relatively sort of secure. But all of these stories, people being hacked all over the place, foreign governments being involved, have really sort of opened my eyes to the insecurity in our elections. And we have another election coming up next year and 2 years after that. And so I am joined by our chief technologist, Joe Hall, who has a long background in voting and election integrity. And I'm basically just brought him into the room to sort of make me feel better. So, Joe, what's going on? What happened last year?
So you shouldn't feel bad. It's curious to hear you say that election seasons never end, because that's really, until now, the experience I associate with being an election official. You know, there are many election officials work all year long to do one or two elections. In some places like LA, Los Angeles, they do an election every month, right? Most people don't think about elections as much as you do. So most people only think about elections once every 2 to 4 years, usually in a even-numbered year divisible by the number 4, right? And it's the presidential election. So this is actually kind of a weird election in that it is the election that's never going to end. And we will still be talking about the repercussions of it next year. There's investigations associated with influence in the election, stuff like that. So if you think the 2016 election is going away, you're going to have to live with it for a little bit longer. But your direct question was, should you worry, essentially, about the integrity of your vote? And does diversity really give us a leg up? Diversity in sort of something we tend to talk about as monoculture of a given computer system. And so there were fears 10 to 15 years ago about that we used so many Windows computers that we had a real problem if there was a specific failure to the Windows computer, that it would spread throughout all of our IT stuff. So that is something to worry about, but that really only protects you against someone who's trying to hack national elections. We don't do many national elections. You know,
Okay.
There's representatives, there's Senate, there's vice president, and president, right? So those are the only races you should think about being protected from diversity of the voting system infrastructure.
So what about the rest?
There are a lot of other things we vote on.
How's my county assessor, county auditor? How secure is that?
So I don't know what county you live in, but they all have different names. It depends, and it depends on a number of things. People could be running the exact same technical system, and one have much more defensive capability against external attacks than another, just how they use that system.
Okay.
You know, you could use it with everyone has the same password, and that's probably not the best idea, something that I would advise against. Whereas if you use strong passwords and other tokens, forms of authentication, that's much better. So I would say, you know, the things that are protecting us now are paper and counting the paper. And so in the 2016 election, something like 75% of all voters cast votes on something that resulted in a paper ballot. Either they filled in ovals or they did something on a screen that was then printed out on a piece of paper, which everyone should look at. You're not done if you're not checking your work, right? But then once you have the paper, you really have to have a mechanism for counting the paper. You have to audit the election. And this gets arbitrarily nerdy into statistics, which no one wants to hear about, but you essentially have to do a small recount, not the entire election, but you have to pick a random sample of ballots and check that the computer recorded the same vote that a human would interpret from that ballot. And so that's what we have. Paper most everywhere. Many of the places in the 25% of voters who did not vote on paper, many of those places are as fast as they can trying to procure systems that do provide paper. Whereas in the auditing case, something like 20 states don't do anything, have no requirements about what you do regularly to check the work of a computerized election. 30 states do something. Some of those are not designed to detect adversarial attacks. So like California has a 1% manual tally. That percent doesn't change based on how close the election is, which is the one key characteristic you have to catch either bad guys doing bad things or very small amounts of error that could affect the outcome.
So you're not giving me a whole lot of confidence here. I mean, I know you're going to be doing a lot of work on this in the next year.
This is hard work.
Okay.
This is something that everyone should ask people about. You know, ask your local representatives, your state representatives. and the ones that represent you at the federal level, make sure that you ask for these kinds of things in the upcoming year. In addition to people trying to do better about counting votes, so there's a lot of work to be done in the 25% of places where they don't have paper, but the ones who do, people like us at CDT are working on ways of saying, hey, here's the best thing you could do statistically. You may not be able to do that given your equipment or your laws. So here are steps you need to do to actually change your equipment or your laws to be able to do these things. But until then, here's something that's the next step up that'll make you a little bit more resilient, so to speak, towards either attacks, or often we worry more about errors before the last election, in the sense that many of the things you see are just forms of error. And if you're a smart attacker, you would actually make your attack look like that too, right? So a lot of us are working on things like best practices for cybersecurity and voting system processes and election environments and stuff like that. That includes strong authentication all the way to network security, all the way to things like I was talking about. How do you count, physically do the auditing? How do you physically know that you're counting pieces of paper correctly? Humans think they can count pieces of paper very well.
Oh, I can't. It's too many. Yeah. I get paper cuts.
You need a team of 4 to do it accurately, and you don't want to hear about how they do that, but that's sort of the best method for actually coming up with a number that you can then compare to what the computer says.
Thanks. Check your votes, everybody.